Hello again, everybody. Great to have you along as we welcome you to yet another edition of Journey Through Sports and Life. I'm Scott, along with the M&M girls. We're talking about Marnie and Marjorie. Hello, ladies. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Good. You enjoying the hot weather?
I am.
Yes.
Not too bad.
Yeah, not too bad. As long as it doesn't go above 100 every single day like it has for the last 20 days. Huh?
Yeah. No, I just stay inside. So,
I understand. Yeah. Makes sense. Air conditioning, a great concept.
Oh, love it.
Hello, Marnie. How are you?
I'm good. How are you guys doing?
Good.
I'm sorry that I'm not there with you in person.
Yeah, you're not in the studio, but you're in North Carolina, where it's probably a little cooler than it is here, right?
A little bit, yeah.
All right.
A little bit cooler.
Anything new you'd want to share with us?
The temperatures are starting to slowly drop.
Well, we're going to be talking about football again today. And as you well know, as your grandfather was the former owner of the Philadelphia Eagles, your mother, still to this day, I share with the audience, the only female general manager in the history of the NFL. So that's a pretty good legacy that you. What do you do this time of year?
Well, certainly get excited for the football season.
Right.
This year was a little bit different. This end of summer, because I have two kids that are college students. So last week was definitely interesting. Being in two places at the same time was a little difficult, but I managed to do it. And so now we have two more colleges to cheer for: NC State, go Wolfpack, and App State, go Nears. Roll Nears, actually. I think they say roll Nears.
Right.
So, yeah, very excited for the college and the professional football season to start.
Fantastic.
I'm motivated by taking, all the pictures and all the stories, taking your kids to school, on the first day. So my oldest daughter is now working on her doctorate, and this is the last year of her doctoral program.
In what?
So she's a nurse practitioner.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And so I think I'm going to fly up to Tulsa next weekend and take her to her first day. I'll take her husband and her son with me to take her to school.
You just got your doctorate a short time ago, didn't you?
I did, yes. English pedagogy with a focus on rhetoric and composition.
Oh, my gosh. Well, you're the first one that I've ever met that had that doctorate. Well, I tell you what, you're responsible for our special guest today, who I certainly have known for decades, and is one of the best in the business. So I'm really excited about having him here. There's no question about it. But why don't you introduce our special guest and tell him about the first time you met him?
Well, Rick and I both worked at the Dallas Morning News.
Right.
He is one of the best NFL writers in the history of the NFL, I am not saying that.
Well, I think he was there like half a century for Pete's sake.
He was there for a good while,
50 years?
yes.
But when I was in second grade.
Exactly, yes. I started reading his work when I was 3.
Yeah, there you go. You got it. Well, go for it. Make it official.
But he wrote an NFL column that I think everyone, their IQ, their football and NFL IQ would go up several dozen points if they read Rick's work.
Okay.
Because
well, first of all, before you say Rick's work, give us the official
Rick Gosselin. Yes. And he, my official introduction is Rick Gosselin. If you haven't read his work, go back and look in the archives of the Dallas Morning News because it's outstanding. And one of the things that I've always liked about your work, Rick, is that you...
And first of all, welcome, Rick. Great to have you here.
Welcome. Yes, I start.
She gets a little carried away sometimes, and she's off in another world.
But I'm just really thrilled that you're here. So you.
We all are.
You always teach us something in your columns. There's not just an opinion, but there's something of value that we could take with us. So Rick is our guest today because he's an excellent reporter, writer. He's followed the NFL for many years. He has been with the Dallas Morning News. He's been with other newspapers. He'll tell us a little bit about his journey. But I just feel like we're going to learn a lot today, not just about his story and not just about the NFL, but some other details that really we don't get anywhere else. And that's one of the things that I think is so special about the work that you've done. So welcome. Thank you for joining us. We're in for a real treat today.
Yeah, for sure, Rick. It's great to see you, really. And I was, as I jokingly pass it off to Marjorie, you're one of the best in the business when it comes to writing. And so, I mean, it's an incredible legacy you created for yourself for decades. So really, we're all three of us are excited to have you here. Let me do this, first of all, and then we'll get back to Marjorie because the two of you are writers and are very similar to what your professions have been for so many years. just tell us about how you started, where college, then you went to here. I wrote, you were in Kansas City, then you came here around 1989, 90, 91, thereabouts. So it's been, 3.5 decades that you've been here in Dallas. Just bring us up to date on where it started, and then we'll go with all our questions.
Yeah, I knew when I was in third grade I was going to be a sports writer.
Really?
My dad was heavily into sports. He went to spring training with the New York Giants baseball team back in the 40s.
And where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Detroit, Michigan, suburban Detroit, Grosse Pointe Park. And I was writing little books and things when I was in grade school, and I went to a small Catholic school that was a pretty good Catholic League power in Detroit. Matter of fact, the first two head coaches there won a combined 6 Super Bowl rings. Tom Boyster was the first one, and he won 2 as the personnel director of the New York Giants. He drafted Phil Simms and Lawrence Taylor and Carl Banks. And the second one was George Perlis. It was his first coaching gig. And
They're out of the same school?
Really?
Same high school.
They both went to this high school?
What's the name of the school?
St. Ambrose.
Wow.
In
my
Grosse
gosh. Talk about a legacy at a high school.
350 kids, half girls, and this team in a span of 9 years won 5 city titles and 4 state titles. And they were beating the public school champions who had student populations of 3,500, 4,000. But Catholic schools can recruit.
Well,
George knew what a player looked like.
Yeah, I went to Catholic school also in Santa Fe, New Mexico, St. Michael's. And I can say that we have 2 trainers in the major leagues, one with the Rangers and Porterfield. I'm not sure who he's with right now. But, yeah, a couple of, we produced not the athletes, but the trainers.
Right. So that was my background in high school. And I went to Michigan State. I was an all-city hockey player.
Oh.
And I thought about pursuing hockey in college, but I talked to both Notre Dame and Ohio State about walking on. But middle-class family, I couldn't afford out-of-state tuitions to pursue a dream, so I went right to Michigan State, got right into journalism, I tried out for the student paper my first term. I was hired the second term, and at that time, George Perlis was now at Michigan State. So I already had an in with the football team, and I was sports editor. I was one of the youngest sports editors ever my sophomore year. In the third year, I covered football. And then during that time I was at Michigan State, I was a student stringer for United Press International, a wire service that competed with the Associated Press. And when I got out of college, I hired on initially in Detroit with UPI covering news. They knew I wanted to write sports, but there wasn't an opening. So I spent 2 years in Detroit working city side, but covering the occasional baseball game, football game, Lions, Tigers, Red Wings. And then I transferred to New York City, where I became a full-time sports writer. And that opened up the world for me. By the time I was 25, I had covered an Olympics, a Super Bowl, and a World Series.
What Olympics?
Oh, my gosh.
In 76, I covered the basketball in Montreal in 76.
Okay.
And that was entertaining.
Because wasn't 76 was also the Innsbruck, Austria, wasn't it?
I didn't cover the winners.
Okay.
I just covered the summers.
Yeah.
But I'm working in New York City. Loved it. The 2 years. I was living in Forest Hills. I was half a block from the old West Side Tennis Club.
Oh,
I could see Jimmy Connors and those guys coming up in the subway to go to their matches.
Wow.
And I fell in love with Broadway there. I always saw the original production of Grease when I was in New York.
Did you?
No kidding.
Working for a wire service, being single in New York, I couldn't afford it. So I had a good friend who I covered the Olympics with, who was the Kansas City sports writer for UPI, Tracy Ringlesby.
Oh.
Really?
Wow.
And he and I became tight, and he said, I'm leaving to go cover the Angels for the Long Beach paper. Do you want this job? I said, sure. So he paved the way for me to go to UPI in 77. And that was a great job. It was a one-man sports department. I covered the Royals, and that's when George Brett, and they were going to World Series in the playoffs every year.
Yeah.
George Brett hit 400. I covered the Chiefs, the Kansas City Kings basketball. The NCAA was based there. The National High School Federation was based there. Tom Watson was in his heyday during this time, and I did whatever I wanted to do. I didn't really have a boss. I just made sure everything got covered. Wow. And I did that for 9 years at UPI, and then the Kansas City Star hired me to cover the Chiefs. So I just kind of focused in on football at that point. And I did that for 4 years. Now backtracking to my UPI days, I also covered the Big 8, which was based there. And we used to go on the Big 8 Skyriders to all the campuses by bus. And one of the campuses we went to was Oklahoma State, where I became quite friendly with Jimmy Johnson and his staff.
Oh my gosh.
Tony Wise, Dave Wanstead, Butch Davis, they were all at Oklahoma State, and I would
Yeah.
see them on a fairly
Long
regular
before they
basis.
ever came to Dallas.
Right.
Right, and that's one of the reasons I was hired in Dallas. They came to me in 1989, and after the '89 season, wanted me to move to Dallas to cover the Cowboys, and I initially told them no. I said, I got a great job here, one newspaper town, love the town, it's home. And then Tracy Ringlesby calls me and said, I've worked for the Kansas City Star, and I've worked for the Dallas Morning News, and you got to rethink this one. So the next day I called Dave Smith, and I said, yeah, I'll come down.
Yeah.
And I went in for the interview the next week, and they hired me. But the reason they hired me is I walked into the building with better sources than the guys who had been on the beat, the Mike Fishers, the Mickey Spagnolas,
Right.
the Jim
Right.
Dents, they'd been there. But I knew all those guys.
Yeah.
And then I covered the Cowboys for 2 years before they got good, before they went on the world tour. And they decided I knew so many people in the NFL that I should become the NFL writer. They took Tim Calishaw, who was the NFL writer, and flipped us. They put Tim in the Cowboys, me in the NFL.
Yeah.
And for the next 20 years, I had the job that every male wanted. I covered the best NFL game each week that didn't involve the Cowboys. So for 20 years, I went to an NFL game every weekend. I saw the Niners during the 90s, during their run, the Bills during the 90s, the Packers. I saw the Patriots, the Steelers. I never saw a bad football game. So I did that for 20 years, and then they made me a sports columnist in 2012. And then I started covering everything, which was good because in my life, I had covered everything. I'd covered baseball. As a matter of fact, I had a number of job interviews to cover baseball back when I was in Kansas City in the 80s with UPI. So I was able, as a columnist, I covered all these things. So like I covered, at UPI, I covered the North Carolina State Houston upset. I covered
you
the
were in
Villanova
Albuquerque
Georgetown upset, Olympic basketball. I had a background in all that stuff. So I did that and then I retired after 2018. And just kind of been dabbling with sports since then.
Wow.
Let me ask you a quick question before you go on. That's talk about an incredible career, huh?
And you probably never
Yeah.
saw a bad event, so
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, I saw my share of bad events. I covered,
But if you were covering what you wanted to,
I covered the Kansas City Chiefs for 13 years, and I saw one playoff game. Before that, I was the NFC coordinator, and I covered the New York Giants in UPI New York. I covered one playoff game in 15 years before I got to Dallas.
oh, okay.
My second year, Jimmy, they go up and beat Chicago. I told Jimmy, you have now taken me to more playoff games than I saw the
than
previous
ever.
15
Yeah,
years.
really.
Oh, that's funny. But you got to know Lamar Hunt well.
Very well.
Yeah.
Very well.
Great guy. He did
Oh,
the
yeah.
forward in my first book. Just a dear friend.
The most
Incredible.
humble
Yes.
Oh,
Just a-
he was.
yeah.
Yes. But
superstar in sports
Yeah.
you'll ever meet.
But he did
Just
call
unreal.
and
Unreal.
so one time when I was with the Morning News and I was one of the NFL pickers, for the games, and I picked the Dolphins over Kansas City. And I get a phone call. I'm sitting at my desk. It's Lamar Hunt. He calls me. He goes, "What do you mean you picked the Dolphins?" And so
Did he
we had
really?
a playful
Yeah.
conversation. And I
That's
told him,
funny.
"Well, if Kansas City wins, then I'll never pick against them again."
That's funny.
It was really funny.
Before we get Marnie in for a question, I want to ask you. You said hockey. You were going to be a hockey player. I mean, when you were back as a kid, that baseball, football, and you said hockey.
That was,
And-
that was my sport.
Yeah, I can. My dad was born in Nova Scotia, so I had a baseball. I had a hockey stick before I had a baseball bat. But I never meet anybody, and then he moved to the States and became a citizen. But I just wondered what was it about hockey? I mean, Detroit. I had the Detroit Red Wings,
Well, the
Alex
Red
Del
Wings,
Vecchio, and what have you?
Gordie Howe.
Yeah, Gordie Howe. That's right. So
Whatever the season was,
yeah.
I played. It was touch football or baseball.
Okay. But I just wonder where the hockey, because you're also tall. You're a lot taller than most hockey players
And that's
would be.
one of the reasons back when I was coming out of high school, all the
Right.
scholarships are going to 5'9" Canadians.
Yeah.
Right,
And how
right.
tall are you?
6'3", 6'3".
6'3".
Yeah, end of conversation.
But I
Yeah.
grew up, we had canals about 5 blocks away on the Detroit-Grosse Pointe border, and we grew up skating on the canals.
Okay, that's what I wondered. That's
And then
what
I
wondered.
had never played organized. And then my high school team, got a team my sophomore year. My older brother had played hockey and played competitive hockey. I'd never played a competitive game in my life. So our first game, we're playing Austin High School, Catholic school, and that's Dave the Busher school. And we're having a spaghetti dinner before the game, and my brother said, "No, this is the best hockey in the city. These are the best players. You may have been a star in the Canals, but this is different." So I'm on the second line. We had 2 lines. Second line, up and down the action. First 2 minutes, face off, icing, face off in the far end. I'm at right wing, face off to the right of the goalie. We win the face off. I sweep the puck through the goalie's legs. I scored 3 seconds into my first shift.
You're serious.
And I said, "Oh yeah, this is gonna be real tough." So then I made all city both my junior and senior year. I was one of the top scorers in the league. And again, I thought about continuing, but Ohio State, Notre Dame, that was out of state tuitions. And we were a middle class family, so and I knew what I wanted to do. I might have gone out and played hockey and bottomed out after the college, but I knew I would have a career as a writer.
Right.
So that's what I pursued.
That's fantastic. Marnie, jump in here.
All right, so 2 things, Rick. You said you knew you wanted to be a sports writer from a young age.
Yep.
So, okay, then you did that. Like, how did you know that? But then also, do you think that being an athlete made it easier for you to connect with the athletes that you were covering?
My whole background, my dad was big on sports, whatever the sport we were doing it, and for whatever reason, I think you're either a numbers or a letters guy. And growing up, I was a letters guy.
Yeah.
I definitely wasn't. I never want to see another math class in my life. And I just started doing these little books and on sports and on just about everything. And I liked it. I liked writing. I still like writing. And then, I did my first writing. I did a little blurb, 1-paragraph blurb for the Catholic weekly paper on the football team, which was pretty good. So I did that for a couple years before I went to Michigan State. And then went to Michigan State. I went to the State News, the student paper, and they said, "Where's your clip file?" I had no clip file. So they gave me a chance. I wrote a couple stories on, I think, lacrosse, Michigan State lacrosse and Michigan State soccer. And then they hired me the second term to cover freshman basketball.
Wow.
And it took off from there.
Did you ever consider another career, or were you just? I mean, it just sounds like you were so focused.
I was locked in. I knew I was going to be a writer, and I just didn't know where. I always thought I'd probably end up in Chicago. If you're in Michigan, you figure that's the big time. So to get to, I had never set foot in New York until I flew there to work.
Wow.
I had never set foot in Kansas City until I flew there to work, and I'd never set foot in Dallas till I came down here to work. Starting new was fun and exciting, and that was. I was always able to refresh my challenges with different beats and different cities and different athletes. But yeah, I think Marnie, I think having played sports, I can relate to some of the frustrations and disappointments that athletes have, and I may have approached it differently than other writers because of that. But if you win, they like you. If they win, they like you. If they lose, they're not really happy with you.
Yeah.
I just try to be fair. And let Marty start at the top. From an early age, when I was writing, my goal was to always include something in the story that the reader didn't know. At the end of the story, if the reader said, something, I didn't know that, I succeeded in what I want to do that particular day.
Interesting.
And I always tried to come up with different things. I'll give you an example. I was in the Colts camp one time, interviewing Peyton Manning, and Peyton and I had a pretty good relationship. And I asked him, "Okay, Peyton, there are 4 quarterbacks that have taken teams to players each of the last 2 years. Who are they?" He goes, "Well, me, Brady, Hasselbeck. I don't know who." I said, "Your brother Eli." So athletes like to talk to me because a lot of times I would give them something that they didn't know.
Did he really not?
He couldn't remember his brother. Oh, that's hilarious.
Up in New York with the Giants.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
But that's one thing I always noticed about your work, because I always learned something. I remember sending you an email or a text or something after having read one in particular. and we had a conversation about that, about how that's what you like to do.
Right.
But did you ever, I know Catholic schools, my experience anyway, they were real big on English, just all dissecting sentences and learning. You came out of a Catholic school really ready to write. Did you have that experience, and did you take your classes maybe a little more seriously because you knew you wanted to be a writer?
I took all my classes seriously in high school. What you want and what you eventually get, you don't really know. I was a good student. I was a member of the National Honor Society, and I was accomplished in high school. And good enough grades. The only school I applied to was Michigan State. My brother had gone there, and that's where I wanted to go. So I was good enough to get through. Now, let me say, once I got to Michigan State, I think I learned more working for the student paper than I did in the classroom because of the real-life experiences dealing with people and
true.
And having confrontations with people. You don't get confrontations necessarily in the classroom. You get it in real life in locker rooms.
And did that suit your personality? How did you adjust to that kind of thing?
You hold your own. You stand up to it. You don't be bullied. You don't let people bully you. I've never let people bully me. At 6'3", I'm probably bigger than a lot of the people I'm dealing with. But
did that surprise you? They don't teach you this in journalism school.
No, but that's learning on the fly. I had a good run. I've gotten a Distinguished Alumni Award from Michigan State, which is nice.
Oh, have you really? Good for you.
Congratulations.
Good for you.
Wonderful.
I got the Pro Football Hall of Fame honor in 2004.
Yeah.
Right.
So I've got, all the awards are kind of done now. But yeah, I was always going to be a writer. I was always going to be a sports writer. What I wanted to do, I didn't want to just write. I wanted to have an impact. I just didn't want to be, here's my byline and you read. I want, like I said, educating and teaching people. I wanted to have an impact in whatever sport I was covering. And I think with my draft coverage, with my special team stuff, and a lot of the reporting, I think I did that.
I usually wait till the end of the program to ask people like you when they share something like that, just about what they enjoyed most about what they did, what they're proudest of. But then on top of that, not only what they're proudest of, number one of the question, but number two is, with all that you've done over half a century, what would you like your legacy to be someday? So you just shared a couple of things. You're proud of what you got, from NFL or pro football in 04 and different things, and from Michigan State. But I just wondered, how about it? What are you proudest of? And then on top of that, your legacy. What would you like your legacy to be? All that you have done. It's incredible.
Marjorie hit on it. If I want people to say, something, I learned something when I read him. That's my legacy. I was never into pack reporting. I didn't like holding a microphone or taking notes around the group. When I was doing the columns, I would always find somebody off to the side. I would get somebody who I can get alone. In all the years I was doing the NFL, I had such good relationships with the PR guys and such. They always set me up alone with, when I covered NFL games on a Sunday, I'd always stay over on Monday. And I'd visit with the head coach, the general manager, and a player. And those were all one-on-one. There was one time I was covering Nick Saban's first game in Miami. And I wanted to talk to Saban. And I had known Saban a little bit from when he was in Cleveland with Belichick. So they set it up, and Nick told Harvey Green, okay, I can give him 10 minutes. And I went in with a topic that he really got into. But he told Harvey, at 10 minutes, knock on a door and tell him, Coach, you got a meeting. So he's now into the interview. We're a good 10, 12 minutes in, knock on the door. Harvey pops his head in and says, Coach, you got a meeting. He said, Harvey, that's rude. That happened actually twice. Brett Favre did that too one time.
Great.
I had an interview with Brett Favre, and he told the PR guy, give him 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And he said, hey, I'm doing an interview. Come on.
Wow,
that's great.
Yeah.
That's
so what
great.
would you say was one of your best interviews or most memorable?
Well, what people remember me for was the Jerry Jones, Jimmy Johnson divorce in Orlando, where we were. That was at the NFL meetings, and we came back from a party on Treasure Island, and we were at the bars. Jerry was kind of regaling the press, and then a lot of the media got up to go, and Ed and I stayed with Jerry, and we started going in. How important is a franchise quarterback to a Super Bowl champion? We talked about Aikman. How important is a franchise running back? We talked about him. And how important is a franchise wide receiver like Michael to a Super Bowl team? And how important is the coach? We talked about it. And then he threw out the famous line, 500 people could have done what Jimmy. And he basically told us he was going to fire Jimmy that night. So we were in the bar until 5. The bar had closed. We were there at 5 in the morning. And then we went back, and what happened is Ed stayed in the room, and I went and researched the story. Ed Werder.
Ed Werder.
He stayed in the room to write it. I went and talked to I put the story together, and then came back and gave Ed background quotes and things. And we wrote the story under double byline. And then when the story hit the fan, that was it. People knew that the divorce was soon to be final, and that's probably what I've been known for. But I've done a lot of pieces. I remember in 1994 when the salary cap came in, I wrote a big 1A story on the salary cap, and I said there are 5 positions that are going to matter: quarterback, running back, wide receiver, edge rusher, and cornerback. I mean, not wide receiver, it was left tackle. I said those are the 5 positions that are going to get the money. So if you read that, you knew what was coming. And a lot of NFL people read that and said, you're right on. And then, of course, the draft stuff. I mean, I was for 20 years, I was the guy in the draft because I was the only guy talking to all 32 teams. One GM told me, we consider you the 33rd team because you're the consensus. They know I was talking, and no one knew who I was talking to, but they knew I was talking to all the teams. And I would, at the end, in 2011, I had a list of 120 people I was calling. And they were scouts, personnel directors, general managers, head coaches.
And how often would you talk to them?
Well, I started with the scouts, personnel directors, assistant coaches, and I build up, rankings of where these comments. And then at the end, I would talk to the general managers, head coaches. I would generally talk to the head coaches that last week before the draft. And these conversations would go on for an hour,
Really?
hour and 15, because I'd go through the entire board. Here's my top 15 quarterbacks. Give them the list. We talk about the quarterbacks. We talk up the running backs, every position. As a matter of fact, that's the other story you may remember was I was talking to Belichick. And I never told anybody who I was talking to. Belichick is the only guy who's outed himself as a guy I talked to. So I was talking to Belichick, and I said, did you hear what the kid at Kent State ran today, the quarterback? I said, yeah, Julian Edelman. He said, no. I said, he ran a 4.4. I said, he's too small to be a quarterback, but he's some kind of athlete. And Belichick, so the next day he sent his special teams coach to Kent State and said,
Really?
see if he can catch a punt. And Scotty O'Brien went to Kent State with Jug's gun. He said, yeah, he can catch a punt. They took him in the 7th round.
Yeah.
So now flash forward to the last Super Bowl they
Right.
won. Edelman's the MVP. And on the Monday morning press conference, Sal Palantone of ESPN said, what did you see in Edelman that no one else saw to give him his 7th round? And Belichick thought for a second and said, I got to give Rick Gosselin credit for that one. He put us on Edelman.
Wow.
Which,
Isn't that something?
because Belichick is not, his history is not as friendly as with
Yeah.
media.
Yeah.
For him
Right.
to put me out there, that was kind of a neat moment.
Well, that's very impressive. Very impressive.
Does Edelman know about you?
I'm sure he does. I'm
Have
sure
you
he does.
interviewed him?
I've talked to all those people over
Yeah.
years. Yeah.
You talk
Not about that. I haven't talked to him since that moment. though.
You talk about being in Florida until 5 in the morning with Jimmy and Jerry. And
Not with
I would-
Jimmy.
Well, yeah, right. Not with Jimmy.
Yeah.
But I mean,
That would have been a real
yeah,
story.
right.
Yeah, that would have been something.
right. But I mean, with Jerry, and I remember getting a call and getting wakened up, and I'm trying to remember how they got in the story, but they said, and they said you guys, you in order, and the morning news is, Jerry's, and I said, really? And we were at
It was a 1A story postseason
yeah.
scrimmage. I
Well,
think
we were asked, do we need to go up? Because you were in Orlando, weren't you?
Orlando.
Yeah, that's what I thought. And we were down in Port Charlotte with the Texas Rangers. And so I said, do I need to go up there now? And because no, they'll probably be gone. But yeah, the morning news is up there, and they're in Orlando with Jerry. And I said, oh gosh, so it's over for Jimmy, and it was unbelievable. That's how I got the call, was because they had seen something that you had written, or it was on some.
It was
wherever it was, and that's where we were, down in Port Charlotte.
So how would you say journalism has changed in the course of your career, and what's good, what's bad?
Well, I tell people I'm glad I got in when I got in and got out when I got out.
I usually say that too.
It is a shadow of what it once was. Right now it's the major sports, which is what I cover. They're all focused on television and the networks and the TV contracts, and they're reducing access. I couldn't have done my job the way I did it in today's environment. I had open access.
Just the access that you had.
I had open access. Yeah. When I was in Kansas City, I could walk down the coaching corridor and just plop down with any assistant coach. I used to get my coffee from the head coach's office. He'd be watching film. I'm pouring myself out of his pot of coffee. But I tell you, the best thing that happened to me was all the losing in Kansas City, because I met every assistant coach in the league. When my last year there, Marty Schottenheimer came in. And on his staff, and guys that I became very friendly with, knew Bill Cowher, Tony Dungy, Bruce Arians, they were all on that staff.
Wow. And
I carried those relationships as they went on to become head coaches and Super Bowl championship coaches. So actually the 13 years of bad football in Kansas City, I really benefited from.
Yeah,
it's funny
Marv Levy, Levy. I broke the story when the Kansas City Chiefs hired Marv Levy from Montreal to CFL. And I remained friends with Marv Levy. Bill Polian was one of the in the personnel department back then, and I got to know him. It worked out.
So when I was covering the Cowboys, you talk about access. The first thing they did when we became a beat writer was, here are the codes. Here's the passcode that you punch in to get into the building. Here's the code that you punch in to get into the locker room. Here are the codes. They gave me all the codes. I could go anywhere in the Cowboys facilities, and I had the code to enter that area.
Yeah.
What is the benefit of it now being like the Iron Curtain? Why did the thinking change and the access get so restricted?
Because they don't need you anymore. Once upon a time, and Pete Rozell's philosophy was, newspapers are free advertising. They really took care of it, but now they don't need it anymore, and newspapers are dying. It's like I said, I couldn't have done what I did. I've always been an early riser and a long worker, and when I got to the Cowboys, they had that press room in the back, and I'd be there. And I'd be the only media guy there at 6:30. They'd all pass by that door. They all saw me in their work, and I'd have Aikman would stop in, Urban stop in, Tony Wise would stop in.
You're Jimmy, talking at Valley Ranch.
Valley Ranch.
Yeah, because you have to pass the media room to get to the locker room.
Now the media room is at the Star. It's
right.
You can't see them. You don't know who's coming and going.
Whole different access.
Yeah, you could walk guys out to the parking lot. You can walk guys just about to the locker room itself.
Yeah.
Right.
But I don't understand why. I think that's you get a lot of bad reporting that's going on now. When I was doing it, and let's say I was going to write a story on Troy Aikman calling his own plays, I could take that idea to Norv Turner, and Turner might say that's stupid. Well, I wouldn't write it. See, there's no checks and balances now.
Right.
Yeah. You got an idea, you write it. It may be the most cockamamie idea in history, but there's no coach to tell you, stay away from that one. So I think it's hurt the coverage of teams, the fact they won't let you talk.
Oh, I agree.
And I hated it in Dallas. They'd let the quarterback come out once a week, and there's a mob of 40 people around him. That's not reporting.
No.
No. So a lot of times I try to come up with. I had one instance where I was doing I broke down Troy Aikman by the quarter, how his passes were in each quarter, and I went and talked to Shula. David Shula was the coach at the time. I talked to Jimmy about it, And then I talked to Troy about it after practice, and I had my numbers. He says, "Where'd you get this?" I said, "Well, that's my research." He says, "I just spent a half an hour talking to Shula about this." So again, giving them something they don't know. But I couldn't, in today's environment, I couldn't do that. I wouldn't have access. It's tough to build relationships. I mean, my whole network was built on relationships with assistant coaches. I got to know those guys, and as they moved on to different cities, as they moved on to head coaching jobs, I maintained those relationships. And they were, the head coaches were, a pretty good backbone of my draft coverage, because those are the guys. Here's the players, that we like. But I think it's crazy that they're limiting access. Except that, let's face it, newspapers aren't what they were. I mean, there were that first Super Bowl '92 that I went to. We had Morning News had 38 people there. I don't know if there were 38 people. When I started there were over 100 people in sports. I don't think there are 38 people in sports now.
No,
I'm not sure they have
not.
25 in sports, and that's counting the desk people. It's just it's really changed, and it's like I said, I'm glad I got out when I did, because it would be just frustration after frustration.
Whole different world now. Whole different world. And of course, you were back there. Marnie's grandfather was.
Yeah. Marnie, tell the Eagles to go back to the white helmets with the green eagle wings.
I know. I love that look.
I love that look.
I think that it was great last year when they did the Kelly green or the eagle green uniforms. Let's see. But I do love in fact, I think the cover of the 1974 Eagles yearbook has Harold Carmichael on the cover with the white helmet and the green eagle wing. It's classic.
But now everybody's going to the midnight green, midnight blue, midnight
I don't
whatever.
like
It's not the same.
No, I like the old style. All right, wait. So Rick, let's talk about the fans. So if the reporting is different nowadays, and people don't really have maybe the reporters can't get the access and they can't get the stories. What are fans? Is that why they're turning on players so quickly, or what is it like? How is the fan experience different now? Because the reporting is definitely different.
Well, once upon a time, the fan would turn to the newspapers. Now every team has a website, and they have videos. They have you don't need the newspaper filter. You can go right to the team, and they will have all the stories, all the features that you want. And the networks now, you got NFL Network. You can get 24/7. You got football coverage, and you can watch on the Red Zone all the games on a Sunday. Newspapers have kind of lost their focus, and fans have kind of lost focus on newspapers too. I mean, I used to have all kinds of interchanges with readers back in the 90s. But as time went on, you saw less and less of that because we aren't the player in the game that we were back then. So they're probably not as mad at us as they were back in the 90s. I remember when I was doing the draft grades, and the Cowboys had some terrible drafts, and I give them D's and F's, and the fans were all over me. How can you do that? And I said, no, it's not based on my draft reporting. These are not good drafts. And by and large, I was right for an entire 10, 12, 15 years. Mm-hmm. But again, you don't see any kind of draft research in the mock drafts. I mean, there was some when I did mock drafts, they were very popular in NFL draft rooms.
Oh, they were, yes.
And now but because I was talking to everybody, now the teams have closed off that access. Mm-hmm. You can't talk to people. You can't get a feel for who teams are going to take. So the mock drafts now, it's mostly guesswork.
But you had talents then that were beyond just reporting. I mean, you did so much depth that probably a lot of reporters weren't doing, and that's why you were so well known across the NFL, because they didn't have people in other cities that were doing the depth of work that you were doing.
They didn't have. The Morning News was a special place.
Yeah,
I mean, there weren't 5 papers in the country that had NFL writers, and as far as somebody that goes to every game. The best game each week, not being the Cowboys, there might have been 2 or 3 of us.
Yeah.
USA Today had a guy, of course. I'd see the New York Times person, Casey, but there wasn't a traveling group of national writers. The Morning News really, they made a commitment. We had the national NBA writer, national NFL writer, baseball, NHL. When they got the Stars, they immediately brought an NHL writer in addition to the Stars writer. I mean, the Morning News really treated their readers
Oh,
right?
yeah,
There was so
definitely.
much depth in all the sports. And you look at the baseball, we had Tracy Ringos, we had Jerry
Yeah.
Fraley, we had great
Oh, yeah, definitely.
beat guys. And they went out and got Keith Gave, who was legendary Detroit
Hockey.
Red Wing hockey guy, and he was covering hockey here.
He's got a couple of big books out
Yeah.
there, and even a documentary.
Right.
The Russian
the Russian
Five.
Five, yeah. But, Dave was the best. Money was no object. Dave said, if you got to do a story, go do it.
Yeah.
Won't worry about the cost when you're done. If it's a big enough story to do, go do it. And he told me, I want you to cover a game every Sunday, and if you want to go to the Monday night game, you can do that too. Just whatever you think needs to be done. And if he trusted you on the beat, he trusted your judgment. I remember one time I covered a game in San Francisco and took the red eye and covered a Monday night game in Miami.
Really?
But it was with the morning news. That was no
That
big
was-
deal.
yeah, that was-
Money
we used to
wasn't an issue
travel.
for
We
you.
used to travel 8 and 9 people to Cowboy
Yeah,
games.
yeah, it was
We
crazy.
had bigger crowds, and that was bigger than the Kansas City
Yeah.
media when I was covering the Chiefs.
So did you ever want to go into an NFL front office? Did you always want to stay?
No, I wasn't a draft expert. I was a writer. I wasn't a scout, and I've made no bones about this. I talked to the people that did draft and that did scout and that did know players, and all I did was compile their opinions and build my draft boards off that. There were a couple teams that casually asked me, "Would you be interested?" And I knew my
I'm not
limitations.
surprised.
I knew my limitations. I knew what I wanted to be. I was very happy being a writer. I didn't want the chaos of being a team where good one year, down the next, and you get fired and you're out of there after 3 years. I was very content doing what I was doing, where I was doing it.
What do you miss now?
What do I miss now?
Most. What do you miss most?
The games, going to the games, because I was always covering big games. Going to the, I always covered, one of the championship
Yeah.
games. Yeah, you miss that, but I miss the access. I'm not out there, but that's if I was still doing it, I'd be crying over the lack of access. You develop relationships. I'm
Yeah.
still very close with Cower and Dungy and Arians and people like that, and I've been out of it. And Mike McCarthy was a friend.
Yeah.
I miss the relationships. I mean, that's
Yeah,
probably
that's what I wondered.
the
Well,
best
you
thing,
still do some
relationship.
writing,
makes
so
sense.
tell
Yeah, I
our
dabble.
viewers.
I got my own website, rickgosselin.com, and I may write once a month or once every couple months, just whenever I feel compelled to write something. I'm going to write something the first week of September on the officiating, the scorecard for the officials. I've got one of the fun things I did because of my draft stuff. I went back and did draft reviews, and I've got about 40 of them on a website right now. I went back and saw and put in print what scouts and personnel people and the talented developers were saying about Peyton Manning before the draft, Drew Brees before the draft, Aaron Rodgers before the draft, Adrian Peterson before the draft, and some of the things. The Brady one was interesting because one of the scouts commented he'll make somebody a good school teacher.
Are you serious?
Well, it's before.
Wow.
You don't know Tom Brady. This is all
Yeah, I was
before.
thinking
Yeah.
they probably
All
didn't even
these
talk
comments-
about him because nobody knew who he was really.
And he was a 6th-round draft. He
Yeah,
was a throwaway.
exactly.
All these comments were before the draft. And I talk about, here's his college resume, here's what they said, here's how it played out, here's the Hall of Fame resume.
Yeah, yeah.
And you can find those on rickgosselin.com. I've got
Oh, that'd be
I got
really
all
interesting.
I've been doing the special teams ranking since 1985. I've got every one since 2000 on the website. I've got a lot of draft stuff, a lot of Hall of Fame stuff. I've done a lot of state your cases on players that are not in the Hall of Fame that I think are worthy of discussion.
Haven't you presented a few?
You know,
State your
I-
case?
yeah, I've been on the Hall of Fame committee for 28 years.
I was going to say,
Yeah,
I've seen
yeah.
you involved for a
I
long
presented.
time.
Yeah, I
I
didn't
present-
realize it was that long, but I
Yeah.
knew you were involved. Yeah.
I was on it in Kansas City before I got here.
Oh,
I was
okay.
on it in 88 in Kansas City. And then when I came here, my last year for them was 91. I came here, and then Frank was the guy. And then when Frank retired, I replaced Frank. So
And you're
this
talking
is
about Frank Luxa.
Frank Luxa. And I've been doing, but I presented, as the Dallas rep, I presented Aikman, Irvin, Smith, Drew Pearson, Cliff Harris, Jimmy Johnson, Jerry Jones, all the guys that have got Rayfield Wright, I was quite proud of that one, got him in.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, as a member of the senior committee, Rayfield Wright, Drew Pearson, Cliff Harris all came out of the seniors.
Right.
So I've got
Anybody still out there that you're thinking about?
Darren Woodson. It's going to be tough because two things. This committee loves people that won championships and made all-decade teams. And Darren won championships but didn't make all-decade teams. Leroy Butler made the all-decade team. I think if Darren Woodson made the all-decade team over Butler, he'd be in now, and Butler might be out. But he's pushing the end of his eligibility. He could be soon in the senior pool. He jumps out there, but there are guys. Everson Walls probably should be in. Ralph Neely was an all-decade tackle in the 60s. I think he's been overlooked. He should be discussed.
You think Everson will get in there?
He was close his last year. I wrote a letter the last year, and I said Everson Walls and Phil Schneider, these guys are in their last year. They should be considered. Yeah. Everson won 19 years. No one ever talked about him.
Yeah.
And I wrote the letter, and he made the finals that year. And the compelling case is he's the only cornerback in history to lead the league in interceptions 3 times. Only one other player's done it, and it was Ed Reed, and he was a first ballot Hall of Famer. I think eventually Everson's going to get in, but there is such an abyss of talented players. I've got a list, and I've been on the senior committee since 2004. I got a list of 100 players that should be discussed.
Players, really?
Wow.
There are 26 established franchises, and every one of them has 2 or 3 players they feel deserve to be in. If you just look at the Chiefs, Otis Taylor and Ed Buddy, people like that, and every team's got guys that should be in, and we got to kind of siphon them off and one, and now this is the last year for 3 a year, and it's once you're in the senior pool, we call it the abyss. You're the long shot at best. But Everson, his name has come up, and I think he's got a good shot.
Oh, I'd love to see.
I think that'd be terrific.
I'd love to see him. I created the Everson Walls Legacy Award for the Kidney Foundation. I've emceed their event for years, and I thought, we need to get Everson involved in this. And so he comes in every year now, and we give this award on his name to either a doctor that's a transplant doctor or someone that's received a kidney given a kidney, and he's really enjoyed being there. He and his wife come, and it's been great.
I think the fact he got a ring, the fact he won a ring in New York, I think he helps his case.
Yes.
He was a champion.
That's right. Yeah, he won that Super Bowl after he left here. That's true. Yeah, was it 91, whatever it was, 91, 92?
The 90 season,
Yeah. And Darren Woodson, I think definitely belongs
great
there.
Addition. Yes.
Yeah.
The tough part of Darren is you almost need a stat. You need a stat hook, and he doesn't really have a stat hook. He doesn't. You can't really count tackles. Everybody's got tackles. Sacks, interceptions. You had to see Darren Woodson to appreciate Darren Woodson. He was among the very first wave of cover safeties. They'd walk him up to the line and cover the slot receiver. He covered Chris Carter. He covered Jerry Rice, and he could cover them. But there's no stats there.
Interesting.
And you really, Everson's got 51 picks or something. You've got that stat that gets everybody's attention, but you really had to see Darren Woodson play to appreciate Darren Woodson. Now in my eyes, he's a Hall of Famer. But it may be tougher for him to get in than Everson because Everson's at least got that stat.
Right. We've got 1 minute left. Marnie, 30 seconds. Go for it.
Rick, you can just tell that you love your job because the detail. Like I'm wishing I could jump through the computer just to because the detail, the level of which you share your stories and the memories that you have of all the people and the things. It's incredible. So thank you for just doing such an amazing job of sharing your love of sports and reporting on it so beautifully.
Your job is to get the white helmets back.
We'll keep reminding her.
20 seconds.
That's right.
Go
Thank
for
you
it.
so much for joining us. RickGosselin.com. If you want to learn something, go there. You're going to enjoy it. Thank you.
Thank you.
All the players top 2, your favorites of all time.
George Brett, probably Brett Favre.
Interesting. You ought to add your list to that iconic group. you have been above and beyond, and what we've seen you do for 50 plus years is just incredible.
I appreciate it.
There's a lot of good guys out there, but to do what you have done and be a good guy as well is very special. It's been very, very honorable to have you on the show. So thank you.
This is
Thank you
fun.
so much.
I really enjoyed it. And I appreciate you having me on.
No, continued success. Rick Gosselin, the name of the game, and well, I'll tell you what, our special guest all last hour. So we really appreciate you stopping by. Don't forget, we're going to be back next week. So on behalf of Marnie and Marjorie, I'm Scott. Don't forget, Journey Through Sports and Life, the name of the program. And always remember, live your life as a go-getter, but share your life as a go-giver.